Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month we extend happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. We count that as anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This, as ever, is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. And if you just found our show, welcome. If you're a regular listener, we are thrilled that you're back. As the Christopher Nolan epic Oppenheimer from last summer demonstrated, nuclear war and atomic weapons are very serious business. It's virtually impossible to find humor and levity in a subject as terrifyingly existential as the possibility of nuclear annihilation. And yet, 60 years ago, at the height of the Cold War, when tensions between the U.S. and Russia were at their peak, one filmmaker was daring enough to attempt a comedic approach to this topic. His strategy? Use satire and cartoonish characters to point out the folly of the arms race and the flaws in entrusting flawed human beings with these devastating devices, and to underscore the very real possibility of mankind's destruction if even one bomb was dispatched by accident or deranged impulse. That director was Stanley Kubrick, and that film was Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which first hit theaters on January 29th, 1964. This month, we spotlight what could be Kubrick's greatest film and one of the most important and memorable movies of the 1960s. And to help give Strangelove its proper due, I'll be joined by not one, but two guests. First up will be former film critic Kenneth Turan, followed by a more in-depth discussion with Hofstra University film professor Rodney Hill. We'll head to the war room to decipher the top-secret codes behind Dr. Strangelove and explore how this black comedy masterwork remains evergreen, Kubrick's brilliant directing choices, and key themes underpinning this supreme political satire. I'll also round out this episode with a brief rendezvous with Tom Lucas from Fathom Events, who will unveil Fathom's 2024 lineup of big screen classics returning to theaters this year. Yep, we've got a lot packed into this installment, so strap in, hunker down for some insightful discussions, and enjoy as we officially launch our 2024 season of Cineversary. To better savor the conversations ahead, it's worth it to first take a moment and examine how Dr. Strangelove came to be. So here's the lowdown from Wikipedia. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, is a 1964 political satire black comedy film directed, co-written, and produced by Stanley Kubrick and starring Peter Sellers in 3 roles, including the title character. The film also stars George C. Scott, Sterling Hayden, Keenan Wynn, Slim Pickens, and Tracy Reed. The movie, which satirizes the Cold War fears of a nuclear conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, is loosely based on the thriller novel Red Alert from 1958, written by Peter George, who also co-wrote the screenplay of this film with Kubrick and Terry Southern. The narrative concerns an unhinged United States Air Force general who orders a preemptive nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. It separately follows the President of the United States, his advisors, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a Royal Air Force exchange officer as they attempt to prevent the crew of a B-52, following orders from the general, from bombing the Soviet Union and starting a nuclear war. Kubrick started with nothing but a vague idea to make a thriller about a nuclear accident that built on the widespread Cold War fear for survival. While doing research, the director gradually became aware of the subtle and paradoxical balance of terror between nuclear powers. At Kubrick's request, Alistair Buchan, the head of the Institute for Strategic Studies, recommended the thriller novel Red Alert by Peter George. Kubrick was impressed with the novel and immediately bought the film rights. Kubrick originally intended to film the story as a serious drama. However, he began to see comedy inherent in the idea of mutual assured destruction as he wrote the first draft. He later said, quote, "My idea of doing it as a nightmare comedy came in the early weeks of working on the screenplay. I found that in trying to put meat on the bones and to imagine the scenes fully, one had to keep leaving out of it things that were either absurd or paradoxical in order to keep it from being funny, and these things seemed to be close to the heart of the scenes in question," unquote. Among the different titles Kubrick considered for the movie were Dr. Doomsday, or How to Start World War III Without Even Trying, Dr. Strangelove's Secret Uses of Uranus, how about that one, and Wonderful Bomb. Dr. Strangelove was filmed at Shepperton Studios near London, as Sellers was in the middle of a divorce at the time and unable to leave England. The sets occupied 3 main sound stages: the Pentagon War Room, the B-52 Stratofortress bomber, and the last one containing both the motel room and General Ripper's office and outside corridor. The studio's buildings were also used as the Air Force Base exterior. The film's set design was done by Ken Adam, the production designer of several James Bond films. By the way, at the time he had already worked on Dr. No. And the black and white cinematography was by Gilbert Taylor. The film was edited, meanwhile, by Anthony Harvey and an uncredited Kubrick. Lacking cooperation from the Pentagon in the making of the movie, the set designers reconstructed the aircraft cockpit to the best of their ability by comparing the cockpit of a B-29 Superfortress and a single photograph of the cockpit of a B-52, and then relating this to the geometry of the B-52's fuselage. When some U.S. Air Force personnel were invited to view the reconstructed B-52 cockpit, they said that, quote, it was absolutely correct, even to the little black box, which was the CRM, unquote. Dr. Strangelove is often considered one of the best comedies ever made and one of the greatest films of all time. The film received 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor for Sellers. In 1989, the U.S. Library of Congress included Dr. Strangelove as one of the first 25 films selected for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In 1998, the American Film Institute ranked the film 26th in its list of the best American movies. In the 2007 AFI list, the film ranked 39th. In 2000, the AFI ranked Dr. Strangelove number 3 on its list of the funniest American films, and the movie also ranks highly on various greatest films of all time lists. For example, it's been named number 5 on the Sight and Sound poll of 2002, number 14 by Entertainment Weekly, number 26 by Empire Magazine, number 24 by Total Film Magazine, number 42 by the BBC, and number 47 based on a Time Out Readers poll in 1998, and its screenplay placed as the 12th best ever by the Writers Guild of America. A quick visit to Rotten Tomatoes reveals that Dr. Strangelove enjoys a commanding 98% fresh rating and 9.1 out of 10 average critical score versus a 94% fresh audience score. And a check at Metacritic shows that the acclaim is just as high, where the film earns a 97% Metascore. Let's deactivate the Doomsday device and turn on the Mood Maker machine instead by getting a quick earful of the original trailer for Dr. Strangelove.
Russia. Oh. Base.
10 females to each male.
Coca-Cola machine.
Fluids.
The Doomsday Machine.
Blast off! Where's my shorts?
Where's the bathroom?
Buck, should I get it?
On the hotline.
Dr. Strangelove.
Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and
Love the bomb. A moving picture.
I shouldn't tell you this, Mandrake, but you're a good officer and you have a right to know. It looks like we're in a shooting war.
Hell. All the Russians involved, sir?
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies. I don't like the look of this, Fred. All right, tell you what you better do, old buddy.
I was under the impression that I was the only one in authority to order the use of nuclear weapons.
That's right, sir. You are the only person authorized to do so. And although I hate to judge before all the facts are in, it's beginning to look like General Ripper exceeded his authority.
I first became aware of it, Mandrake, during the physical act of love.
Missile still deflecting. Range 1 mile. Start lever to cut off. Cut off. Suspension power.
Has that plane really got a chance of getting through?
Well, sir, if the pilot's good, see, I mean, if he's really sharp, he can barrel that baby in so low. I mean, you ought to see it sometime. It's a sight. A big plane like a 52. Vroom! It's jet exhaust frying chickens in the barnyard.
Dr. Strangelove.
Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and...
Love the bomb. A moving picture.
Okay, before we introduce our co-pilots on this flight, a reminder that the Gab Fest ahead, it's going to be spoiler-tastic, folks, which means we will be revealing key plot points, as we always do every month. So please avoid listener regret, and before steamrolling full speed ahead, take a whirl through the wondrous cinematic experience that is Dr. Strangelove by watching said movie post-haste. What do you say? Otherwise, you might be as sorry as, well, President Merkin-Muffley.
I'm very sorry. All right, you're sorrier than I am. But I am sorry as well. Don't say that you're more sorry than I am, because I'm capable of being just as sorry as you are. So we're both sorry, all right? All right.
Intro, check. Context, check. Trailer, check. Spoiler warning, check. All right, it's all systems go. Let's say hello to Kenneth Turan, former film critic for NPR and the Los Angeles Times, and author of several books, including Never Coming to a Theater Near You. Ken last joined us it was late 2022 to honor the 80th birthday of Casablanca, back in episode number 53. Kenneth, welcome back to Cineversary.
Oh, great to be back.
Wonderful to hear your voice again. So let's get into it here about Dr. Strangelove. When and where did you first see the film, and what was your initial reaction? Can you recall?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it, I think, when it first came out, 1964. I probably was a freshman in college in that year, and I don't remember where I saw it. I probably saw it in Manhattan when I was home for a vacation. It was kind of, and it remains in many ways, kind of a flabbergasting film. There was nothing like it. You know, I almost couldn't compare it to anything. It didn't remind me of anything.
Right.
It was really kind of a breathtaking piece of work. And my thoughts about some of it have changed over the years, but that aspect of it remains constant. Whenever I see it, I'm just always astonished at what it accomplished and how it accomplished it.
I'm curious, do you think more highly of it today, or has it diminished slightly for whatever reason? Is it still among your favorite films in some way?
I think the thought that pops into my mind is that I take it more seriously now.
Okay.
How impressed I am was it remains constant.
Mm-hmm.
This film is half a comedy and half a warning. And I think the warning part looms larger to me now than it did in 1964.
Yeah. Well, would you agree that Kubrick and his collaborators, maybe that's their intent? It's not all meant to be wall-to-wall yucks. It is a wake-up call, and it still can be 60 years later. Do you agree?
Absolutely. It's just kind of a film. It's kind of a cliche, but it's one of those films where the kind of laughter freezes in your throat.
Well said.
Very funny, intentionally funny. It's not like he doesn't want you to laugh. He wants you to laugh, but he wants you to say, wait a minute, what the hell am I laughing at? What is going on here?
Yes.
And I think that aspect of the film still comes through beautifully.
It's been called possibly the finest political satire and also maybe the greatest black comedy ever made. Would you agree with those premises? Where do you land in terms of, is this rank among black comedies and political satires for you?
Yeah, it does, definitely. I never want to say greatest or best, just because there's so many films out there, and no sooner do you say greatest or best than someone emails you and says, what about X? Oh my God, I forgot about it. So, but one of the best for sure in both categories.
So let's drill down a little deeper here. Why do you think Dr. Strangelove remains one of the most cherished and respected films of all time, especially as a black comedy? Why is this movie deserving of celebration 60 years later? So again, in the context of it's now been 6 decades, pretty much everybody loved it when it first came out, and it sounds like it's still highly acclaimed and regarded. So let's tap into that. What's behind that?
Well, the issue, the serious side of it, the issue it takes on has not gone away. It's not like, well, that was a big issue 60 years ago, but we've got it under control. We very much do not have it under control. In fact, one of the things that impelled Christopher Nolan to make Oppenheimer, which is really the film of the moment, is his concern that people were forgetting about the threat of nuclear annihilation. So this could not be a more timely film. It's unfortunate that it could not be a more timely film. I'd love to be able to say, this isn't a problem anymore. This is a big problem. We don't think about it as much as we used to, but it's still a very big problem. And again, it's one of the driving forces behind Oppenheimer, which has earned, close to $1 billion in worldwide box office. So this is a film its concerns and Oppenheimer's concerns are very similar.
Yeah, I like the comparison there, and it's timely that we're thinking about these topics again in 2023/2024. Oppenheimer is a great recent example. But you think about Strangelove and how distinctively original and emotionally conflicting it is as a film, conflicting in how it can consistently conjure laughs, right, with its absurd characters, the comedic situations. It's also really shocking and horrifying because it depicts this Armageddon scenario and the very real possibility, as you said, of nuclear annihilation due to what? To human error, to stupidity. And by cleverly using humor and parody, right, Kenneth, it can entertainingly address a nightmarishly realistic scenario that could result in the death of untold millions and the end of mankind as we know it, subject matter that is otherwise terrifying to contemplate. So it's almost like Kubrick and his collaborators, they give us this shiny apple that looks real sweet on the outside in terms of funny, but you bite into it, and boy, it's got a bitter aftertaste because of how serious the message is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking, when I was thinking about this film last night, just in preparation for our talk, I remembered one of my favorite lines, which is something that George C. Scott, who plays Buck Turgidson, I believe.
Right, what a name.
Great name, I believe is a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he proposes a kind of nuclear war scenario, and kind of the president, one of the many characters played by Peter Sellers, is kind of horrified at what might happen, and the general says, well, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed a little bit,
You almost hesitate to laugh at a line like that, but it is outright funny.
It's a brilliant line, and it's also terrifying because there are people, who probably think, that nuclear war, is survivable, is winnable. But, we come out on top, which is obviously a kind of insane way to think.
Yeah. What does that even mean, come out on top, right? It's a smaller world every year we keep living on it, and I don't think it's possible to come out on top anymore. I think it just means everybody's dead.
Likely true, but I mean, it's a brilliant way to convey that mindset.
Yes.
To find a funny line that is very much in character with George C. Scott's, character.
Sure.
It's brilliantly done. And, there's so many good actors in this film. I mean, in addition to Peter Sellers, who plays 3 roles, George C. Scott, Sterling Hayden, who plays Jack D. Ripper, the military man who starts everything in process, and William Pickens, who rides the bomb, at the film's finale.
By the way, that was supposed to be Sellers in a 4th role, but I guess he got injured, and they had to bring Slim Pickens aboard in the 11th hour, and he turned in a fantastic performance, of course.
Slim Pickens turned out to be an inspired choice. I mean, something I read said that when he showed up on set in England, and in fact, he had to get a passport. He didn't even have a passport. He was such an American, but he got a passport, got the part, shows up on set, and everyone says, how great. Slim Pickens has shown up completely in character. He looks like the character. He talks like the character. And what they didn't know is this was Slim Pickens, the way he is off screen.
Right. Yeah, not much acting involved there.
Yeah, I mean, he is obviously a really gifted actor, but in terms of nailing this particular part, it was very close to the way he was in real life.
Sure.
It's something that was not the case with Sellers, and Sellers, from what I've read, was anxious about the part even before he was injured, and he had an injury that made it difficult for him to do it, but I'm sure he was relieved not to have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do all the heavy lifting, so it's kind of nice to have a diversity in the cast. But also, you think about how Dr. Strangelove represents this winning collaboration of not only in the casting, but several top talents at the heights of their skills. Obviously, the brilliant director Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he's coming into his own here. I think this is the first picture he produces, actually co-produces it. He's kind of coming into this golden period, if you will. Next, he'll go to 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon and The Shining, et cetera, and building his reputation movie to movie. But you also have, as you said, obviously the actors, Peter Sellers, George C. Scott, Sterling Hayden, but also, as you mentioned, Terry Southern. Yeah, so it's just a great amalgamation of talents coming together at the peak of their powers.
Totally. I mean, really, Stanley Kubrick, it's wonderful when, as you're watching this film, you realize that Stanley Kubrick was able to do exactly what he was trying to do.
Yes.
Sometimes you see a film and you know what the director's trying to get at, and you say, it's not quite there. It's not quite realized. I see where he's going, but it's not getting there. And with Dr. Strangelove, it's clear that Kubrick made exactly the film that he wanted to make. And that's a real pleasure to experience.
Absolutely, regardless of auteur theory or whatever you think about. When an artist, a director in this case, who's, has his hands all over the writing of the picture, and in this case, the producing, and from what I understand, he's in the editing bay working on it closely with the editor too. When they can achieve their singular vision for what they intended and, they get final say on the product, it usually comes out pretty darn good if they're talented. And certainly Stanley Kubrick fits that description.
Oh, yeah. And, he had a lot of experience. He really knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And just at the top of his game, and knew how to get what he wanted from the actors. Again, I'm reading stuff about it that George C. Scott was afraid that he was going too much over the top, and Kubrick said, "Don't worry, we'll just, we'll do it this way, and then we'll do it a different way as well."
Right.
And all the over-the-top readings that Scott was afraid of were the ones Kubrick used, and they worked, brilliantly. He had a real sense of how he wanted everything to work, and he was able to pull it off.
No question about it. You were talking about some of the lines, the famous lines of this movie. Great quotes, one after another.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Monsieur!
You're gonna have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
Is that the whole point of the doomsday machine is lost? If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
I love the line delivery on that one. The timing and just the intonations by Sellers is so brilliant. One great line after another. And I want to read you something here by Roger Ebert in his Great Movies essay about this film. I think he really hits the nail on the head in terms of understanding the comedy. He says, Dr. Strangelove's humor is generated by a basic comic principle. People trying to be funny are never as funny as people trying to be serious and failing. The laughs have to seem forced on unwilling characters by the logic of events. A man wearing a funny hat is not funny, but a man who doesn't know he's wearing a funny hat, now you've got something. The characters in Dr. Strangelove do not know their hats are funny. I really like that line.
Yeah, that's a nice concept. Yeah.
It's a work that endures as an exemplary film that ranks high on several lists. I don't know if you know this. We're going deep in the weeds here, but the AFI on its funniest American films list, it ranked at number 3. It came in number 26 on the AFI's best American movies list in general. And on various greatest films of all time lists, it's been named like number 5 on the Sight and Sound poll of 2002, number 14 by Entertainment Weekly, number 26 by Empire Magazine. On and on and on here. I could keep going on, but again, it's widely agreed that it's an all-time classic. And again, I don't think I'm pouring it on too heavily here to say that Strangelove continues to be cherished today, and for good reason, for a lot of the reasons we talked about.
Yeah, though it's interesting, as I said, that as I've seen it more recently in later life, even though it's very funny, it sounds odd to hear it being, even though I know it's a fact, being on a list of the funniest films. I don't know if I was trying to convince someone who hadn't seen it to see it. I don't know, in all honesty, I could say, you got to watch this. It's one of the funniest films you'll ever see. That doesn't sound like this film to me. The more, as I see it more and more recently, the kind of the warning and the fear it engenders in terms of, this could really happen.
Right.
Something like this could really happen. That really stands out for me as much as the laughs. I still laugh when I see it, for sure. But the fact that it's a warning. It's not like Tootsie or some film that is just funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I am of the same persuasion opinion here, because I will classify this as, it's not a constant knee slapper to me. I'm not busting a gut, catching my breath in hysterical laughter. There are some films that can do that to me. My all-time, gold standard to me is Duck Soup, the Marx Brothers. I'm always in hysterics watching that movie. But here, and I'm not trying to hold it up to an unfair standard, but I just don't find it that wall-to-wall funny, nor are there major belly laughs to me. But it garners many, I don't mean to sound degrading by using a word like snicker, but I'm constantly amused throughout it. But as you said, it's underscored by that tone of seriousness too, where it's funny, but it's kind of uncomfortably funny in some points, because again, I take the threat of nuclear annihilation very seriously. But also, Kubrick, he's not known as a comic artist. He's not Chaplin. But he shows that he can wield the comedic blade very skillfully. But it doesn't have to be exceptionally funny to me to be a winning comedy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a phrase you used, and it's an apt phrase. It's a black comedy.
Yes.
And a lot of things that are labeled black comedies aren't funny at all. I've seen some of the worst films I've seen have been labeled black comedies. It's kind of a label that people put on comedies that are, inept. They say, well, you're not supposed to laugh. It's a black comedy. But Strangelove is genuinely funny, but it is a black comedy. It cuts both ways. But the lines we've been talking about, the situations we've been talking about, they are all funny. But this is the very definition of a black comedy, this film.
That's a fair point. You were talking about how it's still relevant today. I was going to ask, is this film too firmly entrenched in the mid-1960s to be topical or relevant in 2024? Now, again, we agree, right? Nuclear war never goes out of fashion, unfortunately. So in that way, it's always going to be timeless as a film. But are there any other ways that stand out where it's a little creaky, it's a little dated, it's a little unfortunate? I'll be honest, I don't really think so. There are some elements that can threaten to date the film, like the presence of only one female character. You have a lusty and male gaze kind of amenable type of female character at that. And you have some chauvinistic attitudes among the male personalities that maybe can dominate the story. There's references to mid-1960s military concerns like the missile gap, which aren't talked about today. But I would argue that they reinforce the movie's key themes and its satirical styling, so they don't go out of style necessarily. They kind of remind us about what it was like to be alive in 1964 and some of the mores, values, and conventions. So I'm not trying to be too woke about any of this stuff at all. I'm just saying that I'm asking you, do you find any fault with anything that you would deem dated in the movie?
It's so strong, and the dated elements are so minor that I almost don't even notice them.
Yeah.
The plot line, the acting, the dialogue, the direction, they so kind of grab you and pull you forward that you really don't have the leisure to say, people wouldn't say that today. I mean, there's so much about it that feels relevant, that's still funny, that's dramatically involving, that's still an example of great acting, that any tiny parts that might be dated really don't seem to matter.
No, I agree. Here's one little example of, okay, maybe I'm a little younger than you, and I wasn't alive in 1964, and this reference kind of went over my head the first few times I saw it. I had to look it up and understand what was the significance of this. But Kubrick's decision to marry the mushroom cloud nuclear detonation footage at the end with the song "We'll Meet Again" by Vera Lynn. Looking it up, I understand now that was a song remembered fondly by World War II soldiers. But yeah, does that pairing still work if you aren't aware of this association?
You know, when I saw the film, I wasn't aware of that either. I may be old, but I'm not a World War II veteran.
Right.
That part of the film, it just worked for me because it's a great song to marry with that. It's wistful, it's the kind of music it is, the lyrics, they just work. I thought it was a great ending, and it had nothing to do with my memories of the song. When I saw the film the first time, I didn't know anything about the song.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, again, I can relate because I didn't know either. It felt, like you said, kind of sentimental, wistful, but I wasn't even that familiar with the song. I'm trying to read into the lyrics. Is there some in-joke going on here? I guess I should just not assign too much significance to it. It works for people who are older, but it can also work for modern audiences, just in terms of the tone of the song, the kind of song it is.
No, I mean, I think he put it in there exactly for the reason you're saying. And for him, it was a little bit of an added bonus. It's World War II history.
Yeah.
But by no means was this a key part of why he put it in there. He put it in there because it worked for the scene. I mean, that's why he's a really good director. He said, I know just a song that's going to be perfect for the mood I want to create. And that's why he picked it.
Makes sense. So let's talk a bit about how Strangelove was the first of its kind or groundbreaking in any way. Now, I'm not asking you to be an encyclopedia of film history here, but if I can kick off the conversation here, I think we can agree that Dr. Strangelove exhibited some innovation and groundbreaking elements across some different aspects. For example, the film effectively employed satire to tackle the weighty and delicate subject of nuclear war. We've discussed this. It critiqued the political and military establishments of the Cold War era. It offered a sardonic perspective on the arms race and potential for catastrophic outcomes. And by fusing these two subgenres, black comedy and political satire, as we've been discussing, maybe it demonstrates that humor could effectively address serious geopolitical issues, challenging conventional expectations regarding the treatment of such topics in film. Would you agree with this premise? Do you think that it's groundbreaking in terms of how it fuses those two elements?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, it's just, I seem to remember when I saw it, you have really the sense when you're watching it back then that you'd never seen anything like it.
Right.
It didn't harken back to anything else. I guess the closest thing I could think of is maybe some of Preston Sturges' films have serious themes, but their themes are not as world-destroying as this one's. No one had really ever tried a comedy with a theme this dark. So I think that was really a revelation to people, and it just opened up a whole kind of world of different kinds of films that tried to do that. I think, nothing has done it as well as this one, though I'm sure, someone will remind me of something. But I think this was one of the first of the black comedies, if not the first.
Right.
One of the best. It's the gold standard of black comedies.
Yeah, it's interesting to trace the lineage of A Strangelove to films that came out thereafter. Now, the first obvious one that comes to mind is Failsafe, which is released immediately after Dr. Strangelove. It's not a comedy, of course, a black comedy. It features a very similar story.
Yes.
It's a nice kind of pairing, if you will, if you want to watch this back-to-back with Failsafe. But in terms of real black comedies after Strangelove, maybe you think of something like The Russians Are Coming from 1966. Of course, there's Catch-22 in 1970. The movie Airplane from 1980. There's Brazil in 1985. To some extent, there's some nods to Strangelove in a movie like Mars Attacks. Many people have brought up Wag the Dog from 1997 as an inheritor to the mantle of A Strangelove. Also, there's a film called The Pentagon Wars from 1998. Another movie, In the Loop, 2009. And lastly, most recently, a picture like Don't Look Up, which I think was a Netflix original from 2021. Did you have a chance to see Don't Look Up?
Yeah. No, that's definitely a successor to Strangelove.
Yeah.
It's trying to do some of the same things, but there's kind of a cleanness and an elegance to Strangelove that some of these other films can't quite match because, Kubrick was a master director. One of the films I think Brazil is also a very good parallel, and Brazil is a pretty bleak film. I think in terms of weakness, Brazil is getting up there.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a film, I'm not sure I have the title right or not. It concerns the death of Stalin. It may be called The Death of Stalin.
It was called The Death of Stalin, came out in 2017.
It's a very funny film. It's a black comedy. Stalin, what the stuff Stalin did was no laughing matter, but they turned into a black comedy is no other way to talk about it.
It's a blind spot I'll have to catch up to. But yeah, just in terms of innovation, groundbreaking elements of Strangelove, I think tonally it's so interesting because there are taut, tense moments in Dr. Strangelove that make it a topically relevant thriller, right? Not necessarily a wall-to-wall funny fest. Kubrick's work presents a disturbingly plausible situation that was, of course, top of mind for many Americans in 1964, so it capitalizes on these all-too-real fears of the Cold War, only months removed from the Cuban Missile Crisis, as well as the 1961 Berlin Crisis. So again, the topical nature of A Strangelove, but also the juggling of the tones, right? The comedy and the fear, the terror, the thrilling aspects of it. It becomes kind of a thriller, especially aboard the B-52. So being able to masterfully weave in between those tonalities, I think, really speaks highly of somebody like Kubrick.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is something, it's like kids don't try this at home.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to mix those things as adroitly as he did. I mean, and one of the things that make it so special is that when you watch it, it seems very natural. You don't really say, oh my God, can you believe he's doing this? He's blending comedy with this.
Yes, it seems kind of effortless and second nature, and that speaks highly to talent, to skill,
Absolutely.
dexterity with which cinematically to weave those elements together. It's not easy, and it can very quickly fall on its face in the hands of a lesser artist or filmmaker. But I also want to mention how Kubrick's choice to cast Sellers in these multiple roles, it highlights, of course, the actor's versatility. But it was earlier demonstrated in the films Lolita and The Mouse That Roared, also starring Sellers, in which the actor, he does these multiple characters. Sellers, he adeptly portrays three distinct personalities in Strangelove. We mentioned, of course, he's the president, he's group captain Lionel Mandrake, and, of course, the titular character. But this inventive use of a single actor in diverse roles, it's interesting, right? Because it wasn't the first time. We mentioned those other two pictures before it. But immediately thereafter, you think of maybe somebody like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, who adopts multiple roles. Or, okay, to a lesser extent, maybe Lily Tomlin in The Incredible Shrinking Woman. Of course, Eddie Murphy in movies like Coming to America and The Nutty Professor, and comedian Mike Myers and Austin Powers. So you have another lineage here in which maybe Sellers helps inspire some of these later comedians and actors.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I mean, being able to do that really... I mean, people had done, even in early silent films, there were situations where people played the same, like they played sisters or cousins, and they would do very elaborate technical procedures to make it happen. They would shoot one half of the frame and put black on the other half. And then there was a lot of legerdemain involved in the early days. But actors seem to like playing multiple roles. I mean, unless it's too exhausting for them, but Sellers really brought it to a high point.
Yeah, in the modern era, especially, I think a lot of these later comedians and actors would probably point to a Sellers as maybe more inspirational than some of the early examples. But I don't know that for a fact. It's just my hunch.
No, I think you're probably right. I think you're right. And I had read that the studio wouldn't bankroll the film. They wouldn't greenlight the film unless Sellers agreed to take multiple roles.
I did read that, yes.
So, everyone thought this was a good thing.
Yeah, and it certainly was. You think about the visuals in Strangelove, the cinematography, the employing of wide-angle lenses and distinctive camera angles which contribute to its visual impact, and also the memorable special effects like the depiction of the B-52 bomber and the nuclear bomb itself. Production designer Ken Adams has inspired designs, particularly the iconic and expressionistic War Room set design, which is just a showstopper.
Yeah, no, Ken Adams is one of the great production designers, and this is one of his really top films. And, one of the things I'm reminded of is that there was a closing scene to the film that was shot but not used, where there's a pie fight in the war room.
That's right.
I think Kubrick felt, wisely, that this was just taking things a little too far. And he decided, it's gone. There's not even a hint of it in the final film, and I think that was a good decision.
Yeah, I think they had, from what I saw in the Criterion Collection bonus features, to go a little more into context, I think it would have been a one-off, like a one-shot. We got to get this right on the first take. And too many people were laughing and kind of breaking up hysterically, and it wasn't perfect footage, too, which helped contribute to the decision by Kubrick. Let's abandon that. But even if it had been perfect footage, it wouldn't have ended quite with the same impact. Maybe a little too silly.
I mean, that scene of Slim Pickens riding the bomb is hard to improve on,
hard to top.
he kind of slapped himself and said, "Stanley, get serious. This is the best ending you can have."
Yeah, right. Although it is a pretty comedic image, even in Freudian terms.
But it's also killing, when you recognize that this is a nuclear bomb that's going to detonate. It's a
Yes.
chilling image as well. I mean, that's why it's such a brilliant image to end on.
Yeah, it could be the most iconic single image from the film.
I think it is.
Agreed. All right, Kenneth, this month marks the 60th anniversary of Strangelove. Birthdays are a time for giving presents, only it's the fans who continue to receive the gifts when a beloved film marks a milestone year. So in your opinion, what is Dr. Strangelove's greatest gift to viewers?
Well, it enables us to think both simultaneously, ponder and worry about a serious issue, and laugh. It's the rare film that can do both.
Yes.
Make us laugh. They're very serious issue films that make us think about some of the world's problems. But a film that can do both, that is quite a trick.
Right. And you think about all of the movies made about nuclear war, World War III, Armageddon. The vast majority are going to be straight up drama / thrillers, or even horror movies for that matter.
Yep.
But here, how do you kind of wrap that package in a more appealing way and get through with the message to the viewer that can be horrifying, but wrapped in that shell of, comedy that's a little easier to swallow? It is an idea movie. It's a message movie. It could also be enjoyed as just a straight-up comedy if you don't want to think that hard about it, but it's almost impossible not to, right? Because, again, these are existential issues that face us in 2024, let alone 64. And so, again, I totally agree with you. Broaching this topic with viewers, Kubrick comes up with this brilliant way to get us to swallow it a little easier.
I totally agree. It's quite an accomplishment. And, I think Kubrick was a great director, but this is really one of his best films. I think it's on a par with anything he's done. I mean, doesn't have the big production design of some of the later films, but it's something.
No question about it. So, Kenneth, what are you working on right now that you'd like listeners to know about?
Yes, I'm finishing up a book. It's on Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg. It's kind of a joint biography of both of them and the key role they played in, both starting MGM and really creating the modern movie business.
Wow.
God willing, if everything works well, it should come out early next year. So I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic. And where can listeners go to connect with you online or through social media? You still have a presence on Twitter, or as it's now called, X, correct?
Yeah, I'm still on Twitter. That's about it. That's probably the best place to find me. I enjoy Twitter, but the one social media presence is enough for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hear you loud and clear. I'm of the same persuasion. Well, Kenneth, I want to thank you again for taking a deep dive with us into Dr. Strangelove and its wonderful quirks and mysteries and comedy. It's just a joy to revisit a movie like this and talk turkey about it with somebody, who's of like mind and appreciating it as the classic that it is. So thanks again, Kenneth.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk about it with you. And I hope if anyone listening has not seen the film, that we have talked about it in such a way that people will give it a try.
Yes. Come on off the fence, folks. The water's warm and wonderful. Come on and take a swim in Dr. Strangelove. Awesome catching up again with Mr. Turan, who has definitely not lost his fastball when it comes to film analysis. We are indebted to you, Kenneth, for making this meaningful return trip to Cineversary. Thanks again. Next up, it's a new guest to our program, one who's going to take the scenic route with us on our Strangelove bombing run with a long-form interview. So let's give it up for Rodney Hill. It's my pleasure to welcome Hofstra University film professor Rodney Hill, who has co-authored the Encyclopedia of Stanley Kubrick. He's contributed to other books on the director like After Kubrick, A Filmmaker's Legacy, and he's appeared in a video interview on their Criterion Collection edition of Dr. Strangelove. Rodney, we are very excited to have you here on Cineversary.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's my pleasure to be with you.
As soon as I saw your featurette interview on that Criterion Collection edition, I knew, wow, this is the guy. I've got to try to get him aboard here. And you were so gracious with saying yes and allowing ample use of your time here, and we really appreciate it. So, yeah, I couldn't think of a better expert to go deep in the weeds with me here on one of the great film classics. So I always start out with my guests asking, kind of, where were you when? So let's go back, the Wayback Machine here. Do you recall, Rodney, when and where you first watched Dr. Strangelove, and maybe what your initial impression of the movie was?
I must have seen bits and pieces of Dr. Strangelove on television growing up.
Okay.
But my first memory of seeing the film all the way through was in my undergraduate days at Georgia Tech. Uh, a friend of mine there, Rick Clancy, kind of introduced me to Kubrick as a serious filmmaker. I had seen some of Kubrick's work before, like The Shining, but I was really at that point in the process of really rethinking how I approached film and thinking about film in a more serious way, and so sort of discovering Kubrick. And we were both members of a sort of film society there at Georgia Tech, and we would do weekly screenings along with some of our friends. And that's the first time I saw the film with an audience, was at one of those film screenings at Georgia Tech. And I remember really loving it at the time, but I was primed for it. As I said, I was really starting to appreciate Kubrick more fully. I had been introduced to A Clockwork Orange, which blew me out of the water. I mean, it really changed the way I think about movies. And so I was quite receptive to whatever I was going to, find with this film, and seeing it with an audience of young people, it was great, as I remember. I mean, I'm sure the audience was laughing throughout the film. I'm sure I was laughing throughout the film. So I don't think there was ever a point when I didn't really like this movie.
So is this a text that is often taught to your students? Do you have a Kubrick class per se, or do you kind of weave his films into like a film introduction course or something?
Well, I do both, actually. Occasionally, like every 3 or 4 years, I'll teach a course entirely devoted to Kubrick. We offer a course called Film Authorship, so we rotate from one director or group of directors to another. And the Kubrick class is always very popular. And since, I do have a great affinity for Kubrick's films, I like to offer that class every 3 or 4 years.
So is this a film that will be automatically included, or do you kind of rotate them out a bit?
Oh, yeah. Well, with Kubrick, I mean, he really only made about 13 feature films, depending on how you count them.
True.
And so we can see everything in the course of a semester. So of course, this would be one that I would include, even if I couldn't show all of them. But I've also used Dr. Strangelove in my film history class. It's a great example of Cold War paranoia that we find in that period.
Oh, yeah.
I'll sometimes rotate it out with John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate as my example of that sort of Cold War paranoia from the film.
Yeah, that'd be good back to back, sure.
Yeah.
So what's the reception among your students when they first see or really study Dr. Strangelove in the capacity of your class?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because there was a time when the film really didn't work with college-age students.
Interesting. What time was that? Was there a period, or?
I think it was the period sort of when, having been born myself in the mid-60s, I still, in my young adult period, I had gone through the Reagan era. So the Cold War was still very much a reality for me and my generation. But
sure,
as that faded from lived memory among young people, there was a time when I don't think Dr. Strangelove worked as well as it once had. But now I find, because of our political landscape in, say, the last 8 to 10 years or so, suddenly it's regained a kind of cultural relevance, and students really relate to it. They really seem to like it quite a lot.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, just to trace how it can kind of go in and out of fashion, so to speak, geopolitically, or just among the zeitgeist a little bit, and introducing it to fresh eyes, to new eyes, and students who've not seen it before. It's always an interesting litmus test, I'm sure, for you as well as other teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I find it sad in a way that the film is as relevant today as it ever has been.
Yeah, this is true. It kind of speaks to maybe we're in a more dangerous place across the globe, but also the doomsday clock is ticking that much closer to midnight and
right.
all the above. So not a very safe, comforting feeling. However, there is some salve to be had in the knowing that younger generations are gravitating to it now as a way of looking at the world, as a different way of kind of processing what's going on and finding new relevance in it.
Yes, absolutely. Not only in in terms of the potential the nuclear threat, but also, I think the film is largely about the potential return of fascism, which unfortunately has reared its ugly head in recent years as well. So the film is very much concerned with that.
I want to talk with you now and go deeper into the director himself. So what does Strangelove reveal about Stanley Kubrick, Rodney, and what filmmaking choices do you particularly admire in Strangelove? So I'm going to turn this podium over to you, sir. I know this is what you teach. This is what you love. You are a Kubrick aficionado. So I want to hear more about why he's the ideal director for you, Dr. Strangelove.
Well, thanks for that question. It's where to begin.
Exactly.
One of the things I admire most about Kubrick is that he was so bold as a filmmaker and producer. So we have to remember that this project originated with Kubrick and at the time his producing partner, James Harris. And Kubrick, fairly early in his career, sort of set himself up as an independent producer, obviously having to work with studios to get his films distributed and get them financed. But for the most part, he was pursuing projects that he wanted to pursue, and this certainly was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that the independence of Kubrick as a producer, his willingness to take risks with material, this was, we have to remember, really controversial film at the time. And Kubrick had just come off of another really controversial film, Lolita. And that was also a very bold choice for him as a filmmaker. And so his willingness to take on potential controversy and to just dive into it if he found the material compelling, which he did in both of those cases. So that's for me one of the key aspects of Kubrick as a producer. And then also his understanding of the film business. Kubrick was not only a great artist of the cinema, he was a very smart filmmaker business-wise. I mean, he wanted his films to make money.
Certainly.
He wasn't just making films for his own pleasure. So he had this sort of instinct for what would do well.
Mm-hmm.
And those choices were not usually very conventional. So I really admire Kubrick's willingness to depart from convention, and yet at the same time, he's working within the system, making films that are going to succeed with studios, but they really depart from your typical Hollywood fare,
Sure.
I think.
Sure.
And so this is a very unconventional film in a lot of ways, right? Dr. Strangelove, we don't get a happy ending. We get a very strange ending, perplexing sort of ending. This is almost unheard of even today, and for a mainstream American film not to give us a happy ending is still kind of an unconventional choice.
Yeah, let's talk about that just briefly and ruminate on what you just said. Because again, folks, it's 1964. Put yourself in the shoes or the seats, if you will, of moviegoers in that year. And they were used to everything being tied up pretty neatly in a bow, right? To having some resolution that would leave you kind of laughing or happy or feeling better. Sure, there were downbeat endings in Hollywood films in 1964, but not as common, perhaps. Not as expected.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you do have, there are always exceptions. You have films that don't end happily, and totally different kind of film, but West Side Story pops into mind, right, from 1961, I believe. So, basically most of the main characters, or two of the major characters, die, and that's the end. It's very tragic.
Yeah, well, that's almost like like a Shakespearean tragedy.
Sure.
And then, of course, you have film noir, horror, all these different genres or subgenres where you kind of expect it's going to be a downbeat ending. We get that, but I just really take to your point a moment ago about, what a strange ending. And we could spend a whole episode just talking about the conclusion of Strangelove.
Yeah.
But again, I just wanted to ruminate on that very briefly because, I mean, it's not necessarily what you would expect. And it's pretty bleak, but the marriage of that song with the images of the mushroom clouds, I don't know how it's supposed to make you feel, but it's
right.
It's unnerving. In some way, it's like, okay, there's a little bit of snark going on. It's very, very cynical.
Yes. And it leaves us conflicted, I think. As you say, we don't really know how to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it taps into what a great scholar, James Narramore, has identified as the sort of aesthetics of the grotesque in Kubrick's work, this sort of mixing of conflicting emotions. The whole film is, it's a dark comedy about the end of the world, basically.
Yep.
So, comedy and tragedy hitting head to head, and we're getting them both at the same time.
Yes.
And we don't know how to respond. And that pulls us out of being immersed in the story, right? It makes us aware that there is this sort of paradox that is not resolved for us in the film. So we're left realizing that things are not resolved. So even Hollywood films at the time that would give us sort of a downbeat ending, there's some sense of resolution, at least, but not here.
Yeah, this is the most downbeat ending ever, if you really think about it. What
can
be worse than the nuclear annihilation end of the world?
Exactly. but with a wink and a smile, but ultimately just unresolved. And so again, we don't get the kind of comfort that we often get from Hollywood endings, that everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kubrick didn't think everything was going to be okay.
No.
He really was seriously worried about the potential of a nuclear holocaust, basically.
Now, Rodney, people have said that Kubrick often adopts a more objective, or if you will, dispassionate approach to directing a film, like, let's say, Dr. Strangelove, than many other filmmakers would have. He's been called cold and kind of calculating. You might see it in a film more so like The Shining, for example, or 2001: A Space Odyssey, kind of this cold detachment. Do you agree with that? And if so, how does that approach work for Dr. Strangelove?
Well, I understand why people say that. And I don't really read Kubrick in those terms. I think that there's tremendous emotion to be found in many of Kubrick's films. Maybe not in Dr. Strangelove. I mean, not the kind of emotion that I'm talking about. But even in 2001, I think the withholding of emotion from something like 2001 is very deliberate, so that when we do get emotional moments, the payoff is tremendous. I mean, I think the ending of 2001 is one of the most emotionally powerful moments in all of film. And part of that is because he's withheld emotion from most of the movie. Or the moment when Dave Bowman has to let go of Frank. Hal has killed the other astronaut, Frank, and Dave has to sort of accept that. There's this very subtle performance by Keir Dullea in that film where he's experiencing emotion, but he's got to stay on mission. He can't let emotion take over. But then if you look at something like the end of Paths of Glory, a tremendously emotional scene with the woman who would become Kubrick's wife of some 40 plus years, Christiana Harlan.
Singing to the soldiers, right?
Yeah, just a wonderful, I mean, I think Spielberg once said somewhere, is like, if you can watch, I defy you to watch that scene and not weep. It's really a tremendous emotional payoff. So I think Kubrick's approach to emotion is just different. It may not be what we expect. He doesn't go for the easy emotional gratification, but I do think his films, something like Barry Lyndon, I think is a very emotional film. It's all about human frailty. So we don't find the kinds of emotion that we expect in films.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Strangelove is such a parody. I mean, it's such a satire, and it's so absurd. I'm trying to think if we get any genuine emotion other than, is humor an emotion or laughter? That's about the only emotion that we get in that film. I'm trying to think if there are any examples of truly moving emotions in Dr. Strangelove, and I don't think so.
Well, I think that the whole, B-52 bomber run really is gripping, and therein lies the opportunity to plumb some emotion, some suspense, some eagerness, some apprehension. I mean, in one way, it's brilliant filmmaking along the lines of Hitchcock and Psycho, where Kubrick is so adeptly manipulating us to root for the crew of the bomber to succeed. But if they succeed, we're all going to die.
Right.
But again, it's very riveting where, some things are going wrong. There's a fire, the bomb hatch won't open. There are comical moments, Slim Pickens and such. But again, there's an example of it can be very emotional. You can get very spirited about what's going on in that sequence.
This is true, and those characters are even though those scenes are played for comedy ultimately, they're engaged in acts of heroism. Even though we really don't want their mission to succeed, their motivation for going through the mission is a righteous one. I mean, from their standpoint, and so these are very heroic characters.
Right.
And there's that wonderful moment in the war room where the George C. Scott character, General Turgidson, is. I think the president asks him, could they get through? And he ends up saying, hell yeah. Then he realizes, like we realized, oh, wait, we don't want them to make it through.
I wanted to read you something just in terms of his approach, emotionally or non-emotionally, Kubrick. This is Criterion Collection essayist David Bromwich, who wrote that Kubrick looks on people as something other than the earnest strivers and helpers we like to imagine we are. In all of his films, individuals are photographed almost neutrally, without flattering close-ups. He would no more deliver these than he would enforce a pointed cut to elicit a predictable laugh or a groan. His is an abstract method depopulated to the largest practicable extent so as to approach a geometrical purity.
I do think, there is this kind of analytical approach that Kubrick takes.
Sure.
There's no doubt about that. And I do think that he resists the easy sort of emotional delivery that we might expect.
Yeah, he's not going to give you like a series of close-ups or extreme close-ups to show like the emotion on a character's face. It's pretty rare, right? Like that. I think that's pretty consistent, especially in Strangelove.
Or when he does, it's really exaggerated, right?
Yeah, you think of, for example, Sterling Hayden. That's a pretty extreme close-up with the cigar dangling from his mouth.
Yes, the sort of low angle, and it must be really enjoyable for actors to be able to give those kind of performances where they're just allowed to go a little bit over the top. So in a comedy like this, you can get those sort of extreme performances. And Kubrick deals in extremes. If you look across all of his films, you get really extreme performances one way or the other. Either The Shining, for example. So much of the performance in The Shining is this deadpan, banal conversation between the family members talking like this. And then you have Jack Nicholson just going, blah,
Right. Chewing the scenery a bit.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of chewing the scenery in Kubrick, and there's a lot of this sort of flatness. And he goes between those two. Look at A Clockwork Orange. There's some pretty extreme performances in that film. And we do have a lot of close-ups and a lot of very emotional expressions on faces, but they're so exaggerated that they're almost a parody of performance in a way.
I also really admire how Kubrick, he cogently juxtaposes images and music in creative ways that add irony and humor to otherwise non-humorous scenes. Now, the case in point I'm thinking of first is, he marries the footage of the aircraft coupling during the opening credits to the song Try a Little Tenderness, right? He pairs footage of the nuclear mushroom clouds to the Vera Lynn ballad We'll Meet Again, which creates this great non sequitur, I think. And he would repeat this method in 2001, A Space Odyssey, when he employs the Blue Danube Waltz, and in A Clockwork Orange with the song Singin' in the Rain. So he's really masterful at pairing disparate elements.
Absolutely. And again, this gets back to what Naramore calls the aesthetics of the grotesque. Like, how do we deal with that? Right. It sort of makes us aware of the creative process of Kubrick's creative decisions. When something doesn't really fit our expectations, we're put in this sort of double mode of viewing and listening, where we're aware that something is not what we expected. So I've got to go back and think about that now. Why was that decision made? So rather than simply trying to immerse us in a story world where we just deal with these people as though they're real, these characters as if they're real people, I think Kubrick's films, for me anyway, always make me aware of the filmmaking process and Kubrick's decisions as a filmmaker. And that gives us, I think, a richer experience of the work. We can respond to these films as works of art, not simply as really entertaining stories, which of course they are, but there's so much more than that.
What do you think about his decision to A, shoot in black and white, and B, really only employ about 4 primary sets or locations in this narrative?
The decision to shoot in black and white is not so unusual for the time. Even though obviously color had been around for quite a long time, it was still fairly commonplace well into the 1960s for filmmakers to shoot in black and white.
Certainly.
And so up to this point, he had really only done one feature film in color, which was Spartacus. So Dr. Strangelove is the last film that he would do in black and white. But so, I mean, clearly it was a choice. He could have shot the film in color. And doing it in black and white, I think, gives it a little bit more of there's a certain documentary feel to a lot
Yeah,
of this.
there's a documentary like realism to the film that would have mimicked what viewers were used to seeing on their TV screens at the time.
Yeah, especially the few scenes of the combat footage as the troops are approaching the Air Force Base and things like that. And just having the voiceover narrator in the beginning, there's a lot that does have a documentary feel about the film. And so it lends a certain authenticity to the absurdity of the situation. So it's a kind of absurd situation, but constantly grounded in believability and feasibility. This could happen. That's what's so distressing about the film. There's nothing in it that couldn't happen, but it's so absurd, right? And so he's kind of skating that line.
And that's interesting that he has the narration early on, but he abandons it. And there's also a kind of a disclaimer title card that you first see.
It's something about the events depicted in this film could not happen.
That's right. So it's kind of a disclaimer, but do you think they're covering their butts here, or is he being slyly sarcastic with this?
I've read somewhere that he felt compelled somehow to put that in, or whether that was coming from the distributor, Columbia Pictures, or if the Air Force had actually contacted Columbia Pictures. So I don't know.
Yeah, my sense is it's a cover your ass kind of situation because they had no Pentagon cooperation.
No.
And he was praised for his attention to detail in the film so much that he and his crew were able to recreate the actual controls and design of a B-52 aircraft. So I imagine it's Columbia and the filmmakers kind of like, okay, we need to protect ourselves a little bit here. Let's do a disclaimer. But it's just interesting that you have the disclaimer right up front. And then, as you said, you have a voiceover.
Yeah.
But it's not a consistent voiceover throughout the film.
Well, it does. It comes back a couple of times. Like the first few times that we cut back to the crew and the B-52. But yeah, it disappears fairly early.
I guess it serves a practical purpose, but then Kubrick's like, yeah, we don't need that throughout the entire runtime.
Right. You know, you brought up the attention to detail, and I think that's a testament to the great production designer Ken Adam. Not only designed that interior of the B-52, but also that tremendous war room set.
The war room, yes.
And Ken Adam had done all of the James Bond films, I believe, up to that point. It looks like a James Bond set, doesn't it? It looks like the lair of one of the James Bond villains.
Right. Dr. Strangelove himself could have been one of the great James Bond villains if he played it straight, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You also mentioned the 4 locales. I mean, to me, I think that's another one of the really innovative things about the story, to, alternating between those 4 storylines kind of happening simultaneously. So you have these 3 or 4 arenas of action. You've got the Air Force Base with Ripper and Mandrake. You've got the B-52, the crew of the bomber, and then you've got the war room.
Yeah, you could make a case that the 4th is like the Air Force Base perimeter. There is some shooting going on around there.
And there's that brief scene early on with Turgidson and his secretary in some hotel room or something. It's not clear to me where they are. But essentially, like 3 main areas of action and alternating between them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little unusual.
It is, right? You would think that in a story this well, it's funny, of course, but it's also gripping in points, and we're talking about an existential crisis of the highest order. Maybe you'd alternate, maybe you'd have more sets, more locations, characters in different areas. But it's pretty much those 3 spots, but I don't think it ever feels, well, it wouldn't feel claustrophobic except in the B-52 interior, but it's never boring, it's never rote or routine, or it gets kind of stale after a while. I think that he alternates between these locations very adeptly.
That's right. It holds our attention throughout. Back to one of your earlier questions, another thing I really admire about Kubrick is his willingness to make changes. There were lots and lots of rewrites on this script, and even a lot of changes in post-production. Kubrick was not really happy with his first work print edit, and it just didn't really work at all. And apparently he scrapped the whole thing and went back to the drawing board, as they say. I mean, he didn't have to reshoot anything, but he just said, "All right, we got to re-edit this." And it ends up being, I think, a really economical film. It's always a miracle to me that, first of all, that any film gets made is a miracle. And then if it works, that it's astonishing.
Right. It's a double miracle.
It really works so well.
Absolutely.
And he would recognize when something didn't work.
Sure, like the pie fight that got scrapped at the end, of course, is a great example.
Yeah, I really wish we could see that pie fight because
it's too bad.
I've read comments by Mrs. Kubrick, who did see it, who said that it was very, very funny, like the best pie fight ever. And Kubrick really hated having to get rid of it, but he felt it just didn't work. And so he got rid of it.
It could be the holy grail of cutting room floor footage that we'll never see.
Yeah, yeah. I keep holding out hope that maybe somewhere in those archives, it's in some labeled can somewhere.
If they could find extra footage from Metropolis, anything's possible, I guess. But yeah, the director wisely chooses to, I think, shoot in black and white, as we talked about. He also encourages improvisation and ad-libbing from his performers, from what I understand. He, of course, would shoot numerous takes of the same shot or scene. He was famous for this, but, to capture different elements, to capture different approaches from the actors, sometimes benefiting Rodney from happy accidents, like the shot where George C. Scott trips and he gets up and he finishes his line in a more comedic fashion. That's a happy accident that Kubrick encouraged.
Yeah, and luckily, George C. Scott was such a professional that he carried on with the performance, even though he had fallen down.
Right.
And Kubrick decided to keep that. I used to think when I was younger, I think I bought into the myth of Kubrick as this super electronic brain who had everything planned out in advance. And that's just not true. I think he did allow a lot of input from his actors, and he often didn't really know for sure what he was looking for until he saw it. And so he wanted them to bring their creative input. And of course, there's a script, but with somebody like Peter Sellers, you let him bring his own creativity.
You better have some latitude, flexibility there, because he's going to go off script a bit, which is part of the fun. So I want to touch on why the title Dr. Strangelove, especially considering the titular character, as fascinating and funny as he is, he only appears in the last quarter of the picture. So why does this title fit? Now, before you answer, I just suddenly thought of something that you mentioned a moment ago, which is the James Bond films. And of course, the first James Bond film, isn't it Dr. No? So I don't know, is there a play here on, hey, let's name it something that is in the zeitgeist right now, which is Bond-like? Because for the life of me, I mean, it's just such a curious title in that it's not a main character. It's a very memorable, distinctive personality, the wheelchair Dr. Strangelove. But I want to know more about why they ended up with that title.
Rather than trying to give you any kind of definitive answer on that, I'm going to recommend that you and your listeners check out a book, wonderful book on Dr. Strangelove by a guy named Mick Broderick. And it's called Reconstructing Strangelove Inside Stanley Kubrick's Nightmare Comedy. His book really extensively goes through the archives and records of shooting scripts and Kubrick's personal notes and the various different versions of the rewrites. They went through several different potential titles, even including Red Alert, which was the title of the source novel that was considered at one point.
I don't necessarily am looking for an answer as to how they arrived at it. I'm more interested in, why do you, Rodney, think the title works?
Well, it works because I think it's a funny reference to all of the perverse sexuality in the film.
This is a good segue, because that's my next question about, so go ahead.
We've already mentioned, I think, the opening of the film with the sexual imagery. So Kubrick lets us know right off the bat that this is going to have a lot of sexual imagery in it, sexual symbolism. For me, it all comes down to, I guess, the dangers of male sexuality, right? The dangers of unbridled cis male, straight male sexuality, or sexual repression, or whatever the case may be. That really all of this boils down to these sexually insecure men who who, because they're so frustrated in their sex lives, they decide to kill each other
Yes.
or even destroy the world.
We will definitely talk more in depth about this when we cover themes in a moment, so rest assured we are going to come back to this. But yeah, what's your take on the movie's numerous sexual references and imagery and all of the interesting names, right? You consider the suggestive names of many characters. You know, Buck Turgidson. Buck is a euphemism for a manly man, if you will. Turgidson plays on the word turgid. I guess that means full of fluid to the point of hardness.
Right.
You have President Merkin Muffley. That's a name that maybe is evocative of female pubic hair, as if to say he's lacking in male machismo.
Right.
Jack D. Ripper, that's an obvious play on Jack the Ripper, a sexually sadistic serial killer. But also Ripper's use of the word essence is kind of the synonym for semen, if you will. He's depicted as this impotent character who blames his sexual dysfunction on a communist conspiracy. Mandrake, so I'm looking this up. Okay, what's that all about? I guess it's the name of a mythical herb or a root believed to increase male potency. This character is also evocative of the prim and proper English officer played by Alec Guinness in Bridge on the River Kwai. Now, that's not a sexual thing, but it's interesting that there's multiple meanings behind or behind the characters, too. There's Bat Guano. The name can be interpreted as batshit, which is kind of slang for insane, right? And Dr. Strangelove. So we finally come back to the titular character, right? And he's an amalgamation of several people, including rocket scientist Werner von Braun, nuclear physicist Edward Teller, Rand Corporation strategist Herman Kahn, and even Rotvang, the black-gloved mad scientist in Metropolis.
Yes.
So the name Dr. Strangelove itself is a strange name, but it's also got the word love in it, which dovetails back to what you're talking about in terms of the sexual themes of the movie.
Well, yes. Yeah. Strange Love. Right. And there's also, there's another film from 1933, a film starring Peter Lorre called Mad Love.
Yes.
Directed by Karl Freund, who had come over to America from Germany. He has these mechanical hands, right? Some gloved mechanical hands. So all of those are sort of antecedents of Dr. Strangelove.
I also thought of Son of Frankenstein. He's the Inspector Coe, I think his name is, played by Lionel Atwill.
Oh, right.
And he has that gloved hand that's a synthetic hand. Anyway, I'm sure there's all kinds of fun references you could point to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to go with all these sexual references. I mean, another thing about Kubrick is he doesn't really give us any definitive answers on any of this stuff. His films lay things out there for us, and then it's kind of up to us to make our own connections.
But you can't deny all of the sexual imagery. You have, obviously, the dangling cigar. It's an evident phallic object.
Sure.
The Coke machine spews this cola. It's almost like an orgasm.
Right.
The refueling of the jets, obvious symbol for sexual coupling. We talked about that. The B-52's complex procedure that arms the bomb is kind of suggestive of foreplay, like a ritual of sorts. The plane is rendered impotent at the last moment when the bomb doors fail to open.
Right.
The big one, Major Kong straddles the nuclear bomb as if it were a giant phallus.
Of course.
Dr. Strangelove's arm itself, the saluting gestures, the sudden erect standing posture, those are phallic symbols. The intended bomb target is the island of Laputa, which in Spanish means the whore. We can go on and on and on. There's so many examples, and it's not coincidence. Like, they're having fun here.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little bit like, okay, we get the point, but some of it is more subtle and sly than others, and others are very obvious.
You're right. There is no denying all of these elements. They're there. They're obvious. There's a pattern throughout the film of all these references.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is, I think it's just simply related to the film's almost juvenile, sometimes, approach to humor, right? I mean, there is humor to be found in sex, right? I mean, sex jokes, they've stood the test of time. People continue making jokes about sex. But also it just taps back into this idea of male sexual aggression as a major threat. And as sort of one of the things about humanity that we haven't quite gotten past. And it leads to all sorts of problems. There is a certain grotesqueness as well. We've talked already about this aesthetics of the grotesque, and the way that Ripper and Mandrake are talking in the office, it's very uncomfortable, right? And
I just love Peter Sellers' responses are just priceless.
Mandrake.
Yes, Dad?
Have you ever seen a commie drink a glass of water?
Well, yeah,
I can't say I have, Jack.
Vodka. That's what they drink, isn't it? Never water.
Well, I believe that's what they drink, Jack, yes.
On no account will a commie ever drink water, and not without good reason.
Oh, yes. I can't quite see what you're getting at, Jack.
Water. That's what I'm getting at, water.
Right, just a little, right, once he
Yes,
starts to
yes.
get the idea, oh, this is what's happening,
Mhm.
this guy is nuts, right? And it's all about his own infertility or impotence or whatever the case may be. So it's all about, overcompensation, perhaps.
Yeah, man's impulse to wage war is linked to his sexual drive, and a man's sexual dysfunction or frustration, in this case rippers, can have disastrous repercussions. It becomes quite obvious if you take a closer look at it, but it's so absurd to base a movie thematically on that premise. It can only be satire if you really think about it, because in the real world, how can that possibly happen? Would you have a renegade general who decides to go off the grid and launch this missile just because he's having sexual problems? You would like to think, no, that could never happen in the real world. But truth is, human beings are pretty complex, sophisticated creatures, and what drives us can be very, very dark and mysterious. And what's more dark and mysterious than the sexual drive?
This is true. We hope that this could never happen, but as you say, people are very complex, but sometimes not complex at all, right? Sometimes we behave in irrational ways, simplest of reasons. I'm not a military historian, but some people have suggested that what we now know about Curtis LeMay and other people from the post-World War II era, according to some commentators, some of these people really were pretty certifiable in a way.
Yeah, you think of who's the FBI director who kind of led a secret
Hoover,
right?
Hoover, right,
Yes.
right.
Led this secret sexual life, enjoyed dressing up in women's clothes. Not that there's anything wrong with that, Mr. Seinfeld. Of course, no.
But when you repress it, then it comes out in inappropriate ways, right? This is all classic Freudianism, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, we could have a field day talking about all the different examples of rampant sexuality in Strangelove. I think we've given you some pretty good examples. Yeah, let's segue then, talk a bit about messages or thematic takeaways. Now, we just gave the audience a pretty big one, which is man's desire to wage war is linked or coupled to his sexual drive. This is from Slant magazine critic Clayton Dillard, who said, nearly every scene in Strangelove features a scenario or line of dialogue that suggests a world where all men are perpetually on the verge of whipping out their dicks. Dr. Strangelove is unique as an American studio film in that nearly every scene addresses its alignment of military action with sexual impotence and bodily excretion. It's possibly the filthiest studio comedy ever made, even though there isn't a single gross-out gag, curse word, or graphic image in its entire running time.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment, I think. Kubrick's films often are about the worst of human impulses, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's another reason that some people don't like him. People, I think, mistakenly characterized him as a misanthrope. And so this propensity towards war is something he came back to several times, and
Full Metal Jacket.
often linking it with sexuality or sexual insecurity. But I think Kubrick was just trying to give an honest look at the foibles of humanity, even in a satire like Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, I think that's a juicy theme right there, the paradox of being human. Film scholar Michael Broderick said man is technologically advanced, he's intellectual, he's sophisticated, capable of creating machines that are designed to improve life. But deep down inside, we remain a primitive, utterly fallible creature whose perfectly logical creations can backfire on us.
Yeah.
We have these id-like tendencies and base instincts that can prove our undoing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a major concern of Kubrick throughout his films, and especially in this one. So somewhere Kubrick said, we are not fallen angels, but we are risen apes, right? We're still very much tied to that primitive part of us. And Kubrick, I think, felt that he had to address that primitive beast within humanity in order to appreciate the moments when we've managed to rise above that. The fact that we have art or music or science is pretty incredible when you consider that we are just barely above the level of apes in some ways.
Yeah, he will certainly revisit that in 2001, just a few years later.
Yeah.
So what other subtext messages, morals to the story do you kind of point to? Like when you're teaching this film to your class, do you touch on thematic elements at all?
Well, inevitably, I mean, the Kubrick's films do point us towards certain themes. I don't think they give us very clearly delineated messages, but they raise questions.
Okay.
In Mick Broderick's book, he quotes from a handwritten note that he found in the Kubrick archives, where these are just personal notes that Kubrick had made to himself. This document outlines some of Kubrick's intentions for the film. So it's a rare look. I mean, Kubrick in interviews would very rarely indicate what he was going for. He preferred to let the films speak for themselves.
Right.
But here's a note that Broderick located where Kubrick sort of, for his own purposes, lays out some of his intentions for the film. One, to demonstrate that amoral technical efficiency and ruthlessness cannot prevent an accident from occurring. So no matter how much you plan and whatever, there's still that unknown factor of accidents or fate or whatever. And a lot of Kubrick's films go into that. Number two says, once occurring, an accident tends to accelerate. Another one says, the absurdity of quote unquote logic. Here's another one, to satirize government dependence on scientific advice, to reveal facts about the deterrent. So, I mean, Kubrick really was trying to take the sort of mutually assured destruction strategy to its logical end. And then the last one says to be heretical. So I think that's where the dark comedy comes in. But it's all, also a recurring theme in Kubrick is the breakdown in communication, the breakdowns of technology, right? We get a lot of that in Dr. Strangelove.
No question.
There's so many really funny instances of that in Dr. Strangelove.
Oh, yeah.
After when Bat Guano has broken in finally and Peter Sellers picks up the telephone and it's not even connected, the receiver is not even connected to the phone. It's this wonderful sight gag there, and you have that throughout the film. The recall code, the fact that the CRM machine gets blown up.
And you think about when the president is talking to the premier, it's like, oh, if you call information in, I forget what Russian city it is, you can get through.
Omsk information.
Thank you.
Right. But just, yes, the absurdity of what you would have to do, I guess, in those days, you would have to do that. You would have to, how do I get Omsk information? Can you imagine?
Crazy.
Yeah.
No, great example, one after another there of, communication is a problem. And again, revisited in many different Kubrick works.
And the dangers of the return of fascism. That's a big part of what the film is about symbolically in the end, when Dr. Strangelove gets up out of the wheelchair and says, I can walk, All of these discussions in the war room as they realize that the bombs are about to go off, they start making plans that sound a lot like plans that the Nazis might have made, like who gets to live, who has to die, the sort of intentional breeding of humans, things like that. But there's a lot of stuff thrown at us in the last part of the film.
It's a great point.
Kind of warning about the return of fascism. And I wish I could have found the exact quote, but somewhere Kubrick in an interview said, it's some kind of variation on the old saying that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But he said that really the real tragedy is that we're unable to learn from history because things never look the same the next time around. Right.
That's an interesting take.
So the next time that fascism comes along is not going to look like it did last time.
Yes.
So we won't recognize it until it's too late. And, there's a real danger of that too.
Once again, Kubrick's playing three-dimensional chess.
Right.
But Strangelove, we can agree. Like a major theme, as you've already touched on a moment ago, is the absurdity of nuclear conflict, the folly of the arms race itself, and the Cold War, the ironic fallacy of nuclear weapons being these deterrents due to the theory of mutually assured destruction. You mentioned that. But also, a moment ago, you were talking about when you were naming those 4 or 5 different things, like bureaucracy and red tape and established protocol can also have disastrous consequences. And so as evidence of that, you think about how the B-52 bomber crew follows their orders at all costs.
Right.
Mandrake has to humor Ripper to try to get the retreat code. Turgidson is compelled to cover his military ass and discourages collaborations with the Russians while the world is on the verge of meltdown. The president attempts to maintain this polite diplomatic banter with the Russian prime minister while on the hotline, this ridiculous back and forth banter. Bat Guano resists shooting the Coke machine because it's private property. On and on, like, again, the red tape, the established guidelines and protocols, they can lead to disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of bureaucracy points to the dangers of having our humanity sacrificed to some sort of system. Like if we start really believing in the system, if we really just sort of become servants of the system, then, we've relinquished our humanity in a way. This reminds me of something that my unofficial guru, Joseph Campbell, said when Bill Moyers was interviewing him. And I know that Kubrick read Joseph Campbell's work also. That is that we all live in relation to a system, but the trick is to, live within that system, but as a human being, right? To somehow reconcile the needs of being within a system, but not letting it sort of relieve us of our humanity.
Yeah.
And that comes up a lot in Kubrick's films.
Certainly, yeah. There was one other theme I had down on my list here, which is resistance to the inevitability of destruction is futile. And the reason I wrote it down is I was really inspired by this other quote. So if you'll indulge me here, I just want to read this. This is Nafis Shafizadeh from Senses of Cinema. I really like this essay from this author who said, "It is this contrast in the final mushroom cloud shots, this contradiction between the beauty of the images and what they represent, where the question of who exactly is this I who learned to stop worrying and love the bomb is finally answered. It is the narrator, the camera itself, who has finally stopped worrying and beholds the images delicately, tenderly, lovingly. The duality and the anxiety that the camera and we have struggled with, rooting for Kong but hoping the president and Mandrake will save the world, are assuaged in the final scene. The camera has stopped worrying, has stopped resisting, and now loves. The explosion has happened, and we must accept the post-apocalyptic, meaning post-coital world. It is the camera that is the I in the title, and in this case, that I is most certainly and very horribly male." It's an interesting take, interesting reading on Strangelove.
Yeah.
The overarching theme to me there is resistance is futile. It's inevitable. We are just going to destroy ourselves, which is pretty bleak,
That is the cynical position of the film, perhaps, that especially if we're not careful, this is what's going to happen, and it may be too late anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we could take that same lesson and apply it to climate change, all sorts of things.
Sure.
The scientists have been trying to tell us and trying to tell us and trying to tell us, and we just keep spiraling merrily on the path to hell. And so there is this kind of recurring theme through Kubrick's films of this penchant for self-destruction, right? For some reason, I'm thinking about, of all things, the Tom Cruise character in Eyes Wide Shut, Dr. Harford, where all of the warning signs, like you go to this huge mansion, people are in masks and black cloaks, and all signs say, get the hell out of this place.
Right.
But he just dives right in. He's like, he's ready for it. He's like, yes. I was like, okay, you get a little bit more than you bargained for. So we're not smart enough to recognize our own danger to ourselves, perhaps. I mean, I'd never really thought about that. It's a great comment about that. I mean, the end of the film is very beautiful in a way. I mean, those images are beautiful. The music is beautiful. It's a very sentimental song.
Yes.
Maybe, I mean, I don't think anybody ever actually is going to embrace the idea of nuclear war, but we do have to embrace the idea of death, right? Nobody wants to think about that, but we all have to face it eventually. And some people suggest, philosophers suggest that if you haven't really come to terms with death, then you're not really fully alive, that the true experience of being alive has to reckon with death in some way. So maybe that's the way that actually works psychologically. Because I don't think anybody is ever going to be in love. Most of us are not going to be in love with the idea of all-out nuclear war, but we do have to somehow come to terms with death, that it is going to end for me someday. I'm not anxious for it, but it's going to happen.
And therein lies the value of the subtitle, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which, I mean, it's ridiculously long
Yeah.
subtitle, but that's the whole point, and it kind of dovetails with what you were saying there. If you are alive in the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st, you are living through a period where you're just going to have to accept the fact that life here could end at any time. It could be nuclear destruction. It could be, terrible catastrophic change that happens more quickly than you think, climate change, if you will. It could be an asteroid hitting the planet within a couple of years, whatever. It could be a lot of different things that, you'd like to think we can avoid or circumvent somehow. And we certainly have the means, especially with the previous two. But again, if you're alive in this period of time in history, it's just part of being human being. You're going to have to accept the fact that it could all come to an end pretty quickly.
Yeah, but the stop worrying part is also, I think, important, because
Yes.
we can't allow ourselves to be consumed by that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We somehow have to deal with that knowledge and yet go on with our day-to-day lives. And there's another paradox. I mean, Kubrick is full of paradoxes, and we have to live in that dual awareness that I can't let myself stop living just because I know that one day, somehow or other, I'm going to die. And it may be in one of these ways, it may be some other way. I'm reminded perversely of a line from, I think it's in Annie Hall. And I know Kubrick admired Woody Allen, but I don't think there was any real connection here. But it just reminds me of, there's a scene where his character as a kid is seeing a psychiatrist. The mother takes him there because he's always depressed, and the doctor asks him why. He's like, well, because the universe is expanding. And if the universe is expanding, that means that one day it's just going to expand and stop existing. So what's the point?
Right.
And the mother says, Brooklyn is not expanding. So you live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not expanding. So it was like we have to hold both of those ideas at the same time, right?
Yes.
The universe is expanding and one day will just not exist anymore. But here we are in our lives and we have to reconcile those things.
Yeah, that's a good reference point. All right, well, we're sending 60th birthday wishes to Dr. Strangelove this month, and birthdays are always a time for giving presents. Only, Rodney, it's the fans who continue to receive the gifts. That's my contention, especially when a beloved film marks a milestone year. So let me ask you, what is Dr. Strangelove's greatest gift to viewers?
Well, if I had to pick one thing, I would say that it gives us the ability to laugh in the face of the direst situation.
Yes.
If we can find comedy in the end of the world, then maybe everything will be okay somehow after all. But as I said earlier, it also doesn't reassure us that everything is going to be all right. And so it leaves us still searching for some kind of resolution, which I think is a good thing. If a work of art can leave us thinking and grappling with some kind of dilemma, that's a great thing. And the way that Kubrick puts this film together, or really any of his films, it allows us to experience the artistry of the film. We're aware of it. And one of my former teachers, Kristen Thompson, said that if we really approach a film or work of art analytically, we are in a sense participating in the creative process. If we recognize the creative choices, we recognize the narrative strategies, then we're kind of participating. And in doing so, that process kind of reawakens us to our own experience in our own lives. And I think Dr. Strangelove does that in some ways.
By the way, we've had Kristen Thompson on our show, as we have James Naramore. So you're just name dropping people left and right who have been a part of this anniversary.
I admire both of them very much.
Well, we're glad we had you on the show, too. But before we let you go, are there any projects or writings, maybe classes, events, or otherwise that you're currently involved in, Rodney, that you'd like listeners to know about?
Well, I do want to mention a book that I co-edited with one of my Hofstra colleagues, Brett Bennington. It's a little outside my purview. It's not specifically on film, but it's a collection of essays called After Apollo, Cultural Legacies of the Race to the Moon, and that recently came out from the University of Florida Press. Some of the essays are related to film and television, and some are related to other aspects of culture and science and that sort of thing. So that's been my latest project. In the spring semester, I'm gearing up for a course I'm going to teach on horror film. It's been a while since I taught that class.
Nice.
Looking forward to that. Probably will integrate The Shining into that somehow.
All right. Well, it was wonderful to speak with you, Rodney. This was such a pleasure, such a treat to, again, go down the rabbit hole of Dr. Strangelove and talk to somebody in the know who teaches this on a somewhat regular basis. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. And, hey, keep watching and teaching the great films.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's been my pleasure entirely. Thanks a lot.
What a fascinating one-on-one that was with Rodney Hill, a real go-to expert on the universe of Stanley Kubrick and our podcast's newest friend. Hey, thanks again for the sit-down, Rodney. Okay, rounding out our wide slate of guests for January, we welcome back Tom Lucas with Fathom Events. Let's say hello to Tom Lucas, Vice President of Studio Relations for Fathom Events, the company that, like us, celebrates milestone anniversaries of movie classics every year. Only Fathom doesn't podcast, they actually bring these beloved films back to the big screen in theaters across the country. Hi, Tom. Welcome back to Cineversary.
Eric, nice to see you and hear your voice again.
Wonderful to have you here, sir, and happy late New Year. So I just wanted to go through the 2024 slate, maybe month by month, with you, perhaps sharing some details on the big screen classics chosen for this year, this series. So can we go month to month here? I'll kind of name off the movies I see here, and just want to hear your take on each one and what viewers can look forward to. Does that sound good?
Sure, that's good.
So I see right up front here, we've got a big heavyweight. We've got The Wizard of Oz for its 85th anniversary, and you actually have 3 dates scheduled in January this month for Oz. It's January 28th, 29th, and 31st. So 85th anniversary, it's not necessarily like one you'd associate with a major milestone, but hey, any reason to bring back Wizard of Oz to theaters, I'm sure a welcome one by fans and viewers, right? So what is it about The Wizard of Oz that made the cut here? Was it just a no-brainer? Hey, chance to revisit Wizard of Oz?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's one of the most beloved movies in the history of Hollywood. And we've done it in the past. It's always a big fan favorite. We don't want to do it every year. And we work very closely in this case with the studio is Warner Brothers. We look, what can we add to it to make it a little extra, make it into an event?
Mm-hmm.
And we are presenting it in its original aspect ratio. We're delivering it to theaters on DCP. It's going to look as good as it has ever looked. We also are adding an introduction to all of the big screen classics we're going to talk about, Eric, from film historian and renowned critic Leonard Maltin.
Nice. Okay. You mentioned just a moment ago, I just want to make sure our listeners understand, DCP. Can you explain what that is?
Well, it's a digital cinema package. Mm-hmm. It's a way to deliver the film, feature film, and any added value content, in this case, the Leonard Maltin intro, to the individual theaters.
Gotcha.
It can be delivered by satellite. There's, I don't want to get too technical here, but there's a company, DC, that can satellite feed them in, or we deliver hard drives to the theater.
Right.
And it assures the highest quality presentation that you can see.
Yeah, viewers are not going to be cheated in terms of some lower resolution or something like that. It's still going to be ultra high def, I assume, and a fantastic presentation. But just in case my listeners wanted to know, DCP, I'm glad you spelled that out. So moving on, I see My Fair Lady for its 60th anniversary. Hard to believe that movie's celebrating 6 decades now. That's going to be February 4th and 5th. So next month, we've got a classic musical on the agenda. Tell us about that.
Well, My Fair Lady, and what you're going to see as we run through these titles, Eric, is a pretty diverse slate, not only in terms of when the movies were initially released, but also in who their target audience is, what the ratings are on it. My Fair Lady, as you know, George Cukor, Audrey Hepburn, Rex Harrison, Stanley Hall. It is a pedigree, true classic.
No question about it.
We have done this in the past many years ago too, and it did terrific. So again, this will be coupled with a Leonard Maltin intro and delivered on DCP.
So it sounds like in the case of, let's say, Wizard of Oz, My Fair Lady, these are return champions, if you will, where they're audience tested in a way that you know that you're going to get a decent, good turnout for these, and so it behooves you to bring them back maybe on another anniversary year down the road. It sounds like these were well attended, and that might factor into how you decide what movies to choose going forward. Is that fair to say?
Yep, it's one of the factors, and there's a number of factors. I don't want to digress at this point, but I'm sure we'll get into it. And we also have the requests that come in from consumers. We collect consumer feedback, and these are two that always come out.
So moving on to March, we have Labyrinth. That's Jim Henson's film from, I think it was 1986. And this will be March 6th and March 10th. Now, this is an example of, among your big screen classics lineup, it's not necessarily an anniversary year of a classic movie. So it doesn't have to fit that mold per se. But a film like Labyrinth, I think you've shown that in the past, and it's probably gotten very popular reception. Is that true?
It is, and Labyrinth is interesting on a number of fronts. When it came out, as you're probably aware, it was not a box office hit.
That's right.
But it built to become a real cult classic favorite, and we get a lot of requests for it.
So again, it doesn't have to be an anniversary, a big anniversary year for it to make the cut. I don't know if in years past you were very sacrosanct to that rule, or have the rules kind of bent and become more flexible here? I'm just curious.
Well, we've always looked at a major anniversary as a plus, and it is one of the factors, but there are a number of other factors.
Sure.
And I'll wait till you want to dig into that.
Yeah, no, we don't have to go too deep in the weeds here, but again, it's more of a curiosity factor. But I see for April, you've got one of the biggies here. It's Gone with the Wind. It's its 85th anniversary, of course, released the same year, 1939, as The Wizard of Oz. And this will be April 7th, April 8th, and April 10th. As I mentioned, some of these comebacks to the theater will actually get 3 dates as opposed to the normal 2. And a movie like Gone with the Wind, I'm sure that you'll have some popular reception for that, right? So has that been the case in years past when you've shown Gone with the Wind on the big screen?
Gone with the Wind has not been shown a lot of times, but when we have, it's been one of our highest grossing classic films ever. I will point out one thing, Eric, too. We have 3 dates, but 4 showtimes for Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. And the other titles you're going to refer to have 2 play dates, but 3 showtimes.
Okay, so if it's a particularly beloved film, a real cherished classic, it might get some more show dates, an extra date or 2.
Correct.
Okay, so looking ahead to May, on May 5th and May 8th, we have Steel Magnolias. Now, that film is celebrating its 35th birthday this year. So what do we need to know about Steel Magnolias? Is this the first time it's made the lineup?
No, I think we had done it years ago, but it's just to, kind of reflect the diversity of the lineup. We've got some real raunchy comedies. We've got some highbrow musicals. This one is got to bring a Kleenex with you or tissues.
Right.
So, but it's a really beautiful film, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, a good opportunity for maybe a ladies' night among the crowds too. So then in June, we have The Muppet Movie, 45th anniversary of that film on June 2nd and June 3rd. Here we have another Jim Henson mini classic, if you will. The original Muppet Movie, I think came out in 1979, if I'm not mistaken. So here, like Labyrinth, we have an example of it's not necessarily a major milestone anniversary this year, but who cares? It's a good reason to bring back a beloved picture.
And this one was interesting because it was a late edition. We initially had identified 12 titles and had wanted to do Muppet Movie and bring it back. As you're right, it was the first of the Muppet movies, and it did come out in June 79. And it is a beloved picture. When Universal said yes, they would like to include it, we did add it in as a 13th title for 2024.
Very nice. Okay, moving on here, we're in the middle of the summer, and we have, let's see, on June 23rd and June 26th. So this is an example of June having 2 big screen classic features to look forward to. It is South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, and it's the 25th anniversary of this modern classic, if you will. So it's also a sing-along, it says here.
Well, two things. First of all, you just set up the perfect example for the diversity of the slate. You go from Muppet movie, G-rated, family-friendly, to South Park, as raunchy as you can get. But it's another, as you said, modern-day classic with a huge franchise following.
Oh, yeah.
The first time we've done this, we've wanted to do this title for several years, and we're really excited to be able to bring it to the big screen.
So when they say sing-along, now it's been a long time since I've seen this film, but there's a few songs in it, but it's not wall-to-wall musical kind of a movie. But I assume for the songs that are sung, you have audience participation. So what, you've got the moving ball that goes over each of the syllables kind of thing?
Yes, that's correct. And it's not throughout the whole movie.
Right. They didn't have you and your Fathom team reshoot the movie to make it a musical, right?
Well, as you know, the creative forces behind this movie, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, we can't make one touch to anything.
Of course not. No. But it is a fun movie to revisit, and there are some songs in there, including the famous Blame Canada song. That'll be fun to sing along to. So, yeah, good things to look forward to there. So as we start heading into the second half of 2024, we see that we have The Never-Ending Story and its 40th anniversary coming up. This will be July 21st and 22nd. So here's another example of a beloved children's fantasy classic, as with Labyrinth, as with, maybe the Muppet movie to some extent, but you have some fantasy elements represented here on your slate.
And this one, it is a big anniversary, and we're bringing it out in July, which is the actual 40th anniversary. It originally released in July 1984.
That's a good point, which I didn't ask you about before, and we really haven't touched on much. But so as far as trying to slate these particular movies, they don't have to fall within their anniversary month, let alone year, right? Like there are going to be occasions where, for example, Wizard of Oz, it did not come out in January of 1939 or some of these other examples. But here you have symmetry where you can actually slate The Never-Ending Story in its anniversary month.
Yes, and I think that does have a little extra appeal to some of the press.
Mm-hmm.
They're ready to write about it, and if it's on the, especially if it's a big anniversary like 40th.
Right. Now, the next month for August, I think it is the actual anniversary month, if I'm not mistaken. It's Rear Window, and it's the 70th anniversary of this Hitchcock masterpiece. It will be August 25th and August 28th. So can you confirm, was it released in, I think it was August of 1954?
It was, yeah.
What can you say about Rear Window? I mean, it's just flawless, isn't it?
There's a handful of Hitchcock movies that really stand out, and this is one of them. You'd put this in with Psycho and North by Northwest.
Vertigo, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Vertigo would be the other
Absolutely.
one. Absolutely.
Yeah, I call them the impenetrable foursome. That will be a fun one to revisit as well. So September, we're going to shift from thriller to comedy, and Mel Brooks style. It's going to be the 50th anniversary of Blazing Saddles, which will be celebrated on big screens September 15th and 18th. So this seems to be a no-brainer, right? Because you think of really classic comedies, and Mel Brooks has to come top of mind. And 1974, 50 years ago, it's a difficult decision, right? Because you could choose this film or Young Frankenstein. But yeah, it's nice to see Blazing Saddles getting some love.
You're absolutely right. This was one of two phenomenal movies that Mel brought to the big screens in 74. This particular one we have never done before. It's a huge anniversary. There was some discussion. I mean, as you know, and your listeners know, it is not a politically correct feature film in today's world.
That's true.
But it is so hilarious. We just had to do it. If you didn't do it on the 50th, when would you do it?
Right.
Delighted to have this as an additional title.
No question. And I admire that decision. As you said, it's not necessarily going to be the most PC movie in 2024, but hats off to you and your team for not giving into public pressure to, hey, let's start shelving some of these movies just because they don't necessarily fit with the theme of today. I think it's important to have a dialogue about these things, and I imagine Leonard Maltin, if he's going to give the prologue to a movie like this, maybe he'll address that a little bit. Or if nothing else, people will just think about how, not every movie is going to jive with the times, but it's okay. It's all right to have maybe a retrospective and a dialogue about these things as opposed to just canceling them outright. That's my opinion anyway.
No, we have already recorded Leonard's intros, and he does address this.
Nice. Okay.
Everything down to the flatulence scene.
Right.
Maybe, there were some people who thought it wasn't in the best taste, but that's why his intros are so great. He has such a knowledge.
Oh, sure.
And so much history and personal experiences that he's a pleasure to work with.
Yeah, you couldn't have a better ambassador introducing people to these movies or reintroducing them in this context. Okay, so moving on to October, we have Mean Girls. It's the 20th anniversary, and it's October 3rd and October 6th for Mean Girls. So is this the first time that Mean Girls has made your schedule?
It is, and a couple of interesting points. October 3rd is Mean Girls Day. I didn't know that initially.
Wow, I don't even know what that means.
I don't either, but there's going to be a big promotional push, and there'll be some fun things we can do at theaters.
Okay.
And it is also the 20th anniversary. So that shows you we have movies from the 30s like Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind all the way up to 2004 with Mean Girls. It's a very wide slate.
Absolutely. Right. Okay, moving on here for November. On the 17th and the 20th of that month, we are going to be treated to The Fifth Element, which has become kind of this cult classic sci-fi movie. I don't even remember what year that was originally released. Was it 95? Am I right?
97.
97. Okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
So again, here's an example of it's not the anniversary year per se, let's say a 30th or 40th or something like that, but it's a good opportunity to revisit this cult classic.
Agreed. It's a very high quality master that we're able to work from for this film, which really, this plays into the big screen experience.
Absolutely. A good example of the variety, as you said, that you're showing across your slate here. You have a sci-fi movie well represented, as you have comedies and fantasy films and musicals, etc. Makes sense that you'd throw a bone to the sci-fi fans out there. Okay, and then December, we close out the 2024 lineup with White Christmas, and it is the 70th anniversary year of this beloved movie. It'll be December 15th and 16th for White Christmas, which is actually a remake of Holiday Inn, but also starring Bing Crosby. So a lot of fun to be had in the last month of this year, and a timely month to have a Christmas movie, too.
It's just a quintessential holiday movie. It's got the musical element. It's got a comedy twist to it, too. Great cast. It is always a requested title. It made perfect sense. We wanted one real holiday title to drive in December, and this is it.
So why, for example, is this not a sing-along movie? Is that kind of out of your hands? Is that up to the original studio or distributor?
I don't know that there is a sing-along version of this title.
Okay, so in this case, Fathom wouldn't create one.
Oh, no. I mean, basically, we work with all the major studios. They own the IP. They have the feature films. They are responsible for providing us with the master fully cleared. So we don't tamper at all with any of the films.
Yeah, totally respect that. But again, it's a missed opportunity for whoever makes those decisions, because this seems to be a perfect example of what could be a great sing-along among the crowd, right? So maybe in years to come, maybe for its 75th anniversary, we'll get a sing-along of White Christmas. Who knows?
Eric, I will share that with the good people at Paramount.
Go for it. Yeah, who knows? Maybe it'll carry some traction. Well, that should do it. What an impressive lineup again. Hats off again to you and your team for bringing out some big guns here, as well as some underrepresented movies, some more modern classics and masterpieces that are worthy of returning to our theaters. So anything else you want to share about the lineup, or just things looking ahead? I doubt you can spill the beans on anything coming past 2024, right? So it's kind of year to year. Is that correct?
It is year to year, and it's a whole process. It takes us months to get these things cleared, and then trying to slot them into time so they're not one on top of the other. It's like a Rubik's Cube.
Sure, or a fine juggling act. Because, again, you can't please everybody, and you do your best to schedule that anniversary movie in its anniversary month, or maybe according to the season or what have you, but it's not easy. So again, I respect that a lot of thought and careful planning goes into it. So how can listeners find out more about these movies in this 2024 Big Screen Classics series and purchase tickets? They should go to fathomevents.com, right, Tom?
Yes, that's perfect. When you go there, you can be able to look up what theaters in your area, and it'll tell you the show times, and it's all there. That's the best place to go.
Refresh me here. These Fathom movies are available in most major markets across the country. Do you know how many states, or can you tell us a little bit more detail about what areas of the country are represented by Fathom?
I am glad you brought that up. Yeah, that's one of the best things about Fathom. We're owned by the 3 largest movie exhibition companies,
okay.
AMC, Regal, and Cinemark. But we also have over 60 other affiliate exhibitors who participate. Most of these titles that we have just run through will be in 800, 900, over 1,000 theaters.
Amazing.
Will be in every major market, everywhere.
Wow.
I'm not going to say you couldn't be somewhere in Alaska where there's no theater, but there's a very high probability that you can find a theater that's close to you.
Oh, that's so good to know, because again, even people in maybe small towns, maybe some smaller states, don't assume that you're not going to be able to revisit some of these movies. So check the website, check the tickets and availability in different theaters, and chances are it'll be in your neck of the woods.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Tom, thanks again for your time and all of your efforts, to you and your team, for bringing some of our favorite movies back to theaters for everyone to enjoy.
Eric, thanks so much. We appreciate being able to talk to you. Thank you.
Lots and lots of great anniversary films to look forward to at your local cinema this year. We're much obliged to Tom Lucas for dishing out all the details. Thanks, Tom. Did you know that Cineversary has its own website? That's right, we actually now have a vanity URL that's easy to remember, which will take you to a freshly designed portal where you can quickly access the latest episode of your favorite podcast, as well as all of our previous installments. Now it's a lot easier to spread the good word about our show to your friends and family. You simply tell them to visit Cineversary.com. Pretty simple, right? That's Cineversary.com. We also have a custom email address just for you. Now, if you ever want to share feedback on our show or offer suggestions for future installments, or maybe you just have a question about Cineversary, send it to us at cineversarypodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary show to your peeps. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us to get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, some of these other services, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that link, and leave a review and or rating. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Twitter. Our handle is @CineversaryPod, where you can easily tweet or follow us. And if you want to go an extra step in your support of our show and help keep us ad-free, please consider making a monetary donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate-cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, have you checked out my Cineverse Group website? Yeah, it's easy to get confused by these similar sounding names: Cineversary, Cineverse, Tomato. But Cineverse is actually the name of my private film discussion group I founded back in 2005 that continues to meet weekly on Zoom. Every week, the Cineverse group watches, researches, and discusses a different movie, and I create a summary write-up, call it a mini essay if you will, on that movie that gets posted to the Cineverse group blog. So if you want to enjoy reading in-depth content that examines different discussion-worthy motion pictures, including classic Hollywood films, independent features, foreign masterworks, modern movies, and silent-era standouts, then visit cineversegroup.com, simply spelled CINEVERSE group.com. Fun fact, every posted article on cineversegroup.com includes a link to a recording of our group discussion of that particular film, with me leading the conversation as moderator. So if you like what I'm doing on the Cineversary podcast, you might also want to give a listen to some of our Cineverse Group recordings, which are podcasts of a different sort. Again, head over to cineversegroup.com, where you can check out some interesting text and audio content on a variety of films, not necessarily celebrating a milestone anniversary. Here's a warm thought on this cold winter day. In February, Cineversary will be honoring one of the very finest romantic comedies ever produced by Hollywood. It's perhaps the granddaddy of screwballs, and the first film to sweep the top 5 categories at the Academy Awards. Next month, join me as we celebrate the 90th anniversary of Frank Capra's It Happened One Night. Until that time, this is your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies because they're not getting older, they're getting strange lovier. Thanks for giving us a listen.